and that all differences, even the most radical, are framed by continuities which, far from being contingent, are the manifestations of a single shared human nature, a single shared world and reason. Human nature and the nature of things, mirrored in our concepts and beliefs, constitute a universal context for all intellectual history. It is within this context that the central questions of philosophy arise. I should stress that the recovery of reality does not require that we forget the lessons which a historicist's mistake teaches us. To hold that it is not consciousness that determines reality, but instead reality which ultimately determines consciousness, is obviously not to deny the complex interaction between consciousness and reality, nor to fail to recognize the need for a critical examination of our own cognitive faculties. Not all realism is naive. Similarly, the realist does not deny that social and material contexts have changed substantially, and with them not just the possible scope of application of our concepts, but also the concepts themselves, the sensibilities and intuitions, the interests and beliefs, the range of possible desires. She can recognize, that is, the kernel of truth in historicism. What the realist does maintain is that throughout all these massive changes, one can discern a permanent horizon which is sufficiently rich so as to allow us to ground, without the need to reify ideas or concepts, the notion of a common inquiry, of questions to which any human being in principle has access. Consequently, the realist rejects the claim that there is no identity of problems in the history of philosophy. If the historian of philosophy is to avoid confinement to doxography and the production of critical editions, she will have to engage in reformulation and interpretation, and her results must abide by Quentin Skinner's rule that we ascribe to a past author only views he himself would have acknowledged as his own. As Skinner explains, any plausible account of what the agent meant must necessarily fall under and make use of the range of descriptions which the agent himself could, at least in principle, have applied to describe and classify what he was doing. Skinner restricts historically acceptable accounts to those which involve only criteria of description and classification which were available to the agent being interpreted. The question, of course, is what is meant by could in principle, or in other terms, when are criteria or concepts available to an agent. A spectrum of possibilities opens up, extending from exposure to, if anything, minimum translation tools, to submission to radical re-education. Historical accuracy will demand staying closer to the former end of the spectrum. Still, we should not restrict available criteria to those that the agent actually did use. Otherwise, we would be confining within too tight limits the possibility that an observer might be in a position to give a fuller and more convincing account of the agent's behavior than he could himself. There is a distinction to be made between what somebody could be brought to understand given a certain process of education and what somebody would understand given all else remains equal. It may be that anybody could be brought to understand anything through some process, so it is important to specify what is to count as an education. The larger the distance in context and circumstance, the more substantive the education needed to bridge it. Now, the distance from one context to another need not be the same as from that context to the first. Homer, however much in need of refinement our understanding of him, has a place in our world, Homer, the author of the Iliad. But we have absolutely no place within Homer's world. Finding a place for us there may just be tantamount to destroying that world. The same point can be made contemporaneously. A Peruvian Aguaruna coming to an elementary understanding of Ulysses by Joyce requires acculturation, while we can have at least an elementary understanding of the songs and tales of the Aguaruna. Across lesser cultural distances, this asymmetry is commonly borne out in the present world. We might agree that the historical identity of a text can only be absolutely and fully preserved by those accounts that, all else being equal, would have been understood and accepted by the author of the text. Such accounts will have to be formulated in the vocabulary of the said agent